The leader of Russia's key ally, Belarus, announces plans to fly to Beijing. You're watching BBC News Now. It's time for Talking Business.
Hello everybody, a very warm welcome to Talking Business Weekly with me, Aaron Heselhurst. Let's go and take a look at what's on the show. Counting the cost of war. As Ukraine marks a year since the invasion, we're going to take a look at the toll it's taken on the economy. Ukraine's vast farms were feeding the world, but the country is now reliant on billions of dollars of help just to get through every month. Ukraine's finance minister tells me how he's kept the economy functioning despite the missiles and the deliberate targeting of infrastructure, including the power grid. Also, I'm going to be hearing from a leading business voice on how private companies have managed to keep doing business in a war zone and how they're supporting their staff through it all. Many thousands of homes and buildings have been destroyed by Russian bombs. So, how will Ukraine afford to rebuild when the fighting stops? The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development will play a leading role, and its president tells me that the work has already begun. Wherever you're joining me from around the world, once again, a big hello and a warm welcome to the show. You know, Ukraine, it's been suffering for a year now. It's 12 months since Russia invaded because of what President Putin said was a need to demilitarize and denazify that country. And in that time, thousands have died as Ukraine continues to valiantly defend itself. But it's also come at a huge economic cost for both Ukraine and the rest of the world. And that's one of the reasons why Western allies have at times seemed reluctant to throw their full support behind President Zelensky. Ukraine has perhaps suffered most. The size of its economy shrunk more than 30% last year as fighting-age men left the workplace for the front line. The difficulty of running a war zone economy means that inflation is running at more than 26% as the country struggles just to keep supply chains going for everything from food to energy. One of the biggest problems Ukraine faces is the disruption to its vast farming industry. Before the war, it was one of the world's biggest suppliers of foodstuffs, things like wheat, barley and sunflower oil. However, Russian bombing means that fields are not as productive as they were, and Ukraine's still facing shipping restrictions which limit just how much it can export to the rest of the world. The government says there'll be at least 20% less land to farm this year than before the war. That's because of the fighting. It's one reason global food prices remain at historically high levels. For Ukraine, less food out means less cash in, so its allies have been helping out. As you can see here, the US and EU were the biggest contributors last year. But as the war continues, so does the need for cash. The government thinks it needs more than $3 billion a month this year just to keep going. It means Ukraine's debts continue to balloon. They were $95 billion before the war, which was less than half the size of the entire economy. But this year, that debt could hit $114 billion. So, for Ukraine, there's a clear ongoing need for outside support. In the run-up to the anniversary of the war, President Joe Biden was amongst the high-profile visitors, and the United States has been Kyiv's biggest single financial backer. But also, there was the head of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva. So, just how difficult is it to keep a wartime economy running? Well, I've been catching up with Ukraine's finance minister. Sergei Marchenko, my friend, a real pleasure having you on my show again, and sorry it's under these circumstances, but Sergei, let's start with this. It's been a year since the war began, and the cost in human lives and suffering has been unimaginable during this time. But Sergei, what about the impact on the economy as a whole? Paint us a picture. Just how bad has it been?
Unfortunately, the damage done by Russia aggression for Ukraine is tremendous. Last year, we lost particularly more than 30% of our GDP. There was no country which comparable effect, 1 year effect on the economy. That's why we suffered a lot. We lost part of our territory, but we're still capable, we're still able, and we still can execute our key function as a government. Starting from the first days of war, we are able to pay pensions for our people. we pay necessary social protection expenditures as well. We have done all necessary steps to increase our military budget. Half of our budget is a military budget, and of course, it's not an easy way to run a country in a war.
How much money do you need every month to keep the economy going?
Last year, our estimation was 5 billion per month. This year, this amount is lower because currency depreciation, because our currency depreciated around 35% last year, and because other steps and measures which we, Ukraine government, have done to decrease our expenditure. And this year, our needs estimated around 3.5 billion per month. So it's less than last year.
The latest numbers, Sergei, show that inflation is running at 26% in Ukraine. You've had to put interest rates up to 25%. What are you doing to support Ukrainian people so they can afford the basics such as food and energy?
It's a good question because what we realize that up to from 5 to 8 million Ukrainians now abroad. So they are migrants, they left Ukraine, and now a lot of internally displaced people around Ukraine. And for this year, it's also up to 1 billion expenditures to support internally displaced people, to help them to find necessary apartments, shelters, to pay for food, something like that.
Your country, Sergei, has had tens of billions of dollars of international support from the likes of the US and the EU and others just to keep basics going, such as pension payments, government salaries. Are you confident that sort of help is just going to keep coming?
We are confident when we see money in our accounts. Yeah. If not, we should keep moving, we should keep negotiation. Of course, now we see that Ukraine's under tremendous support. All democracies support Ukraine, and it also creates necessary environment for political support for Ukraine. We, despite that it could be some fatigue for Ukraine's case, now we haven't seen fatigue, and we see that EU countries as well as the United States, the United Kingdom have done all necessary steps to further strengthen support for Ukraine. And now we are talking not just for 2023, we already started negotiation with IMF.
Much of the support you've received, particularly from the EU, has been in the form of repayable loans rather than, well, donations. I mean, I'm just wondering, are you worried that you're going to be saddled with a mountain of debt that you're just not going to be able to pay off?
We're not worried about that concern right now. Of course, for us, it's preferable to receive grant financing, but MFA financing, macro-financial assistance from the EU, it's the money which they can provide for us. And the money which we are attracting from the EU is rather cheap money because EU borrows from their risk, as well as money with long-term maturity. As last year it was 15 plus, this year is around 30 years for repayment.
Sergei, you recently met with the boss of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, when she came to Kyiv, and you were looking to negotiate a big long-term loan. Just how vital is that? What exactly do you want from them?
Why we need IMF support? Because IMF is anchor for further donors and investors, particularly for the United States, for the EU, for bilateral credits, etc. When IMF step in, they can easily trust their finances towards Ukraine. They can easily provide us support. That's why IMF is necessary as a background in which we can settle all other negotiations and attract additional financing to cover our budget needs.
But Sergei, big financial support from the likes of the IMF normally come with strings attached. You know, there's no such thing as a free lunch. We're talking reforms to the way government is run, efficiency drives, crackdowns on corruption. How confident, Sergei, are you that you're going to be able to get those changes to happen?
You know, it's our chance. It's our chance using this very harsh period and try to rebuild our governance, try to install all necessary institutions in place, and try to provide all necessary reform. For us, it's a good shot. We should use it as much as possible.
With an eye to rebuilding, Sergey, you recently met with the top Wall Street bank, JP Morgan, about private sector funding for Ukraine. What role do you want the private sector to have, and why would it make sense for them to risk their money in a country that has seen 2 wars in 8 years?
Good question. And that's why it's necessary for us, together with our key partners, I mean, the United States, the United Kingdom, United European Union, to realize that official support, that concessional financing are a good way to support Ukraine in a war period. But we should look further away and understand what business environment we should create in place that to be able to attract foreign direct investment in different forms.
Agriculture, of course, hugely important to Ukraine's economy. And the latest numbers, Sergey, suggest that there's about 20% less land available to plant crops on than before the war. What's the economic impact of that?
Of course, agro sector is one of the key spheres of our economy, and we interested in continue use it as a tool for development of Ukraine. You mentioned that we lost part of our territory, but we try to do necessary demining, try to make necessary counteroffensive operation and grab back our territory which we lost in the first days of war, and to create necessary environment as well for agrosphere to them to be able to provide their service for people and to export grain and food.
And Sergey, let me end on this. How long is it going to take to rebuild Ukraine's economy and get back to the size it was before the war started? And what gives you hope that it can be done?
Hope it's good, but the real steps is better. So I would prefer to clear vision and clear estimates what we should do to bring our economy back to 2021. What we really need, it's a very cohesion policy within the government, very wise steps towards necessary policy tools and steps to help our economy to be in a position before the war.
Well, on that point, Sergey Marchenko, Ukraine's finance minister, a real pleasure as always having you on the show. Thanks for your time. Stay safe, good luck, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much.
So over recent years, Ukraine's been trying to modernize its economy, making it a better place for major international companies to do business as it tries to join the European Union. But all of that, of course, has been fiercely disrupted by the war. So just how are private companies managing to keep the wheels of the economy rolling? The likes of BMW, Coca-Cola, Nestle and Visa. They're some of the more than 600 members of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine. So I've been speaking to its big boss. Andy Hunter, a real pleasure having you on the show. It's really good to see you. Andy, let's start with this. US companies, they are up and running in Ukraine. You have 600 members, the likes of McDonald's, Coca-Cola. This can't be an easy environment for them to be operating in.
Well, exactly, Aaron. I mean, 1 year on, and the Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands, and business stands, and business stands with Ukraine. And we've seen phenomenal resilience and bravery on the front lines by the armed forces, but also we've seen phenomenal bravery and resilience on the business front. I think the fact that the businesses continue to operate, over 70%, they are up and running fully. Over 80% are continuing to pay salaries. And I think it's 1 year on, it's really understanding and having that picture in your head, how companies and businesses continue to operate during a war. So we've seen about 20% have had damage to their properties, to the factories, especially as the Russians came in through the north or through the east. My favorite factory was the Oreo factory, the factory that made Oreos out in the
cookie,
east.
yeah.
The cookies, yeah. That's been destroyed. Or like Unilever factory that packaged the tea through the north, that's been pretty much destroyed. But still, we've seen that the over 70% are continuing.
So to say this is a hostile working environment is an understatement.
Well, exactly. I think we hear the air raid sirens almost on a daily basis. When President Biden was within Kyiv, you could hear the air raid sirens going off. And what that means is for any business, be it like a restaurant like McDonald's or any factory, as soon as the air raid siren starts wailing, you hear it, you have to close. You have to close the restaurant. You have to kindly ask all the customers to leave. You have to get your staff into safety, down into a bunker if you have one, if not to the closest underground metro station, and it's keeping everyone safe. And then you reopen. So that's the first thing about...
And that happens regularly?
Almost every day. And then that's the first thing. And now since October, we've seen the strikes on the infrastructure, on the electricity, on the distribution network. So what that means is many days, the electricity is just cut off. So if you're running a restaurant, a factory, you need to have these generators, diesel generators, and they are behind the restaurants or behind the factory, and they keep the lights on. So you can keep on working even when the grid has been cut.
And Andy, you mentioned the horrendous human cost here. I'm just wondering, how are your members coping with all the loss, as well as supporting their current workforce and I guess the communities?
Well, as you say, Aaron, we have approximately a fifth of employees that have been, at least one employee that's been injured, and a fifth that's been one employee that's been killed. So the cost, the human cost is truly enormous. But I think it's the companies they are supporting. They're supporting the families. They are supporting the employees. We have one of our colleagues who is on the front lines, and we all chipped in and we bought him a 4x4 vehicle. Oh, wow. We buy night vision so that, and we make sure
they've got the right equipment.
So they have the right equipment
to do the job.
And the kit, and it's really supporting. And it's the nation's coming together, and everyone's sort of supporting one another during this really difficult times. But it is providing, and the companies we see, they are providing a lot of support, paying salaries to those that are continuing to work, that those are serving in the army, and to the families of those that have seen real human suffering. I do see that many businesses do see this as a responsibility to keep the economy going.
You mentioned factories, some of the factories being destroyed. I believe a third of your members have had businesses or factories destroyed. Are they, Andy, are they rebuilding now, or is it a wait and see?
Well, we see that some, like I mentioned, Coke came in straight away. They rebuilt. They had damage to their...
So it was damaged?
It was damaged.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
they had damage. And not only did they rebuild the factory, but they also rebuilt the kindergarten, the nursery, the children's nursery in the town, because that was totally damaged. So, and we see others are rebuilding. Others are still wondering, when is the right time to rebuild?
Andy, let me end on this. You mentioned that 3/4 of your members are optimistic, that they believe the war will end this year, 2023. What about you? Because some will say, is that a bit too optimistic?
I think we see where we were a year ago. A year ago, people were saying, leave Ukraine, it's going to fall. Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands. I think we've seen phenomenal resilience of Ukrainians on the front lines. I think we've seen phenomenal unity of the Western nations. So I think with the support, I think the two factors, the Ukrainian resilience and bravery, will continue. I think with the united front of the Western allies, I think it's possible that Ukraine will win this war, and will win this war this year.
Well, on that optimistic point, Andy Hunter, a real pleasure. Always good to
Thank
see
you,
you, my friend. Good luck.
Stay
safe, and I'll definitely talk to you soon.
Thank you.
So the destruction of large swathes of Ukraine has made it hard for the economy to function as well as it did before Russia's invasion. And that means the government has had less tax money coming in and has become massively reliant on outside support. One of the biggest providers of that is the EBRD. That's the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The multilateral development bank, it was set up when the Soviet Union collapsed as a way for Western countries to help Eastern Europe back on its feet. So I've been speaking to the president about how it's now helping Ukraine. Odile Renaud-Bassot, a real pleasure, my friend, having you on the show. And Odile, let's start with this because you were the first big boss of a multilateral development bank to visit Kyiv since the war began. In fact, you were there in October of last year. We know, President Zelensky, he left you in no doubt about the scale of assistance that's needed. I mean, Odile, is it achievable?
Yes, I think it's achievable. I think what is important is to support Ukraine now. And I think the level of support and the commitment of countries supporting Ukraine is amazing. And it's not only about military support, which is absolutely fundamental, but it's also about economic support for the government to be able to pay civil servants and so forth, but also support to the economy. And that's what EBRD we've been focusing on, which is really providing financial support to key infrastructure, such as the railway company, the electricity company, Ukrenergo, which has been, bombarded very regularly. Its infrastructure under bombardment very regularly since October, but still is rebuilding and is able to provide electricity to the people of Ukraine despite all the challenges.
But given all of that, and given, Odile, the war is unfortunately still ongoing, the Russians are engaging in massive destruction. And I realize it's difficult to totally cost reconstruction, but just briefly, can you give us a rough estimate of what sort of numbers are we looking at here?
It's very difficult because, as you are saying, destruction is still ongoing. So figures are, fluctuating every day. And I think the most robust assessment of the overall amount of destruction is the one done by the World Bank and the EU in last autumn. And it was 350 billion of infrastructure, buildings, and so destroyed. So I think this is the order of magnitude. It can be higher. If you look at the impact of loss of GDP and so forth, of course, could be higher.
Odile, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you've agreed to commit up to more than $3 billion over 2022 and 23 to help Ukraine's businesses and economy just keep functioning. For the uninitiated, where does that money come from?
So half of the money comes from our balance sheet, so we take the risk on as a bank, and half comes with guarantees, grants from our key shareholders, US, but also European countries, UK, France, Germany, the European Commission, Norway has been also a very large contributor, the Netherlands. So, these are the key contributors that accepted to cover half of the risk we are taking in the country.
But I've got to ask you this, Odile, is the political will there? Given some of the hesitancy that we've seen from some European countries, also from some parts of the United States Congress?
I think we must acknowledge the efficiency of the President Zelensky in his capacity to convince and to bring this political support to the countries by his capacity to connect and to explain the situation and get the support. So I think that the support remains very strong. Of course, moving forward is a challenge because it's a long-term support that is needed with very high level of financial effort. So we always have to keep in mind what would be the counterfactual. So if Ukraine is not to succeed, and if Ukraine failed in a way, the overall cost in terms of geopolitics, security situation, long-term consequences would be huge.
But let me just stay on this point, because, Odile, if we look at the financial situation many of your client countries are facing, we've had surging inflation, we've got this cost of living crisis, governments pouring money, huge money into their economies just to keep them going. This on top of the vast sums that were spent on COVID and the lockdowns just a couple of years ago. How concerned are you that at some point the monies are just not going to be there to prop up one country such as Ukraine?
But in a way, governments, when they make the decision on budget and so forth, they have to take into account the new context. And the new context, the new geopolitical situation means, for example, that we will see an increase of military expenditure. This is already happening. European countries realize that for their security, in this new world, they need to increase their military expenditure. And I think that continuing to support Ukraine is part of this effort to reflect and is part of the consequences of this new geopolitical situation where preserving security in this part of the world mean providing support to Ukraine. And it's an effort, but compared with the overall benefits of preserving long-term security, this is absolutely needed and makes sense.
And Odile, how do we make sure that Ukraine isn't just saddled with unsustainable loan payments?
I mean, that will be a difficult question, and then it's very early to see the situation because it very much depends on the duration of the war. But indeed, the question of the debt sustainability is a concern, and I think that's why also we see some donors providing more grants.
Well, on that point, Odile Renaud-Bassot, the big boss of the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. Always a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for your time, Odile, and I'll check in with you soon.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget, you can keep up with all the latest on the global economy and the war in Ukraine on the BBC News website and the smartphone app. Of course, you can also follow me on Twitter. Tweet me, I'll tweet you back. You can get me at BBC Aaron. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.